Good morning everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel and to another layout design video. This design is for a purely switching layout loosely based on the F P&E, the Fairport, Painesville and Easton. Here's a map that I found online. It shows that the F P&E had a main line that was only a few miles long. However, it did interchange with the B&O at the west end and the New York Central at the east end. I was also told that there was a nickel plate interchange somewhere, although I was not able to find any reference to that. Not to worry, that was not going to feature as part of the layout. The majority of the trackage owned by the F P&E, and by far the largest customer they served, was Diamond Alkali, which is basically this huge complex here. And although the customer wanted to represent it on his layout, he was aware right from the start that there was no way that he could really do justice to such an industry. It would have easily filled a very large basin all by itself. Now the space the customer had to work with is about 20 feet long by about 3 feet wide. So for a switching layout, it's a decent size. This is what I came up with after a little bit of thought. Start off with an interchange yard at one end. He requested the west end of the layout simply because it was a lot more interesting and busy at that end. So this is now the B&O interchange yard. And on a layout like this, this also serves as staging, even though it's entirely visible. In addition to Diamond Alkali, which produce a lot of products including coke, cement and many others, there was also an interesting selection of other industries. We have fasten paper, Uniroyal rubber, glycochemicals, which used to be owned by Pillsbury, but it was sold to Glyco prior to the period that he wants to represent the layout in. And of course some customers had closed down by then. The Grand River, if we recall from the map, was a lot further from the tracks than I've shown it, but he wanted to just put a little bit of the river in for scenic interest. If we go back here, see, at its closest point, there is still some distance between the river and the tracks. There were many other industries, but these were just a few that I selected that would be both interesting and that would also fit the space without cramping. Now, apart from fastened paper, the whole back side of the layout is part of Diamond Alkali. And as soon as I drew this, I realized my mistake of putting the paper company in the middle. I needed to move it to the end. So that's what I did with the next drawing. Where I had the paper industry, I've now got an additional lead track leading off the back of the layout, representing the connection to the rest of Diamond Alkali. I sent this to the customer and he suggested reducing the interchange yard by 1 track. It's actually 5 tracks in this drawing. He wondered whether it'd be worthwhile losing a track there to spread out the locomotive servicing area. So that's what this drawing is now depicting. See, there's plenty of extra space there. There's room to put a single stall engine house if he wants to. Now he told me he was going to run the layout with just 2 switch engines and nothing else. I think he said they were RS1s, I'm not quite sure though. So just 2 switch engines and probably about 50 cars. Although the actual car count is something that needs to be experimented with. He'll probably start by adding cars a few at a time until it's too cramped and then take a few off. So after I sent this to the customer, he thought it did look better with a 5-track interchange yard. So he put that back in. Now at this point, I'm starting to fill in a few industries. I angled fastened paper slightly per his suggestion. He liked the idea of a curved spur at the end. And I think it's more interesting anyway. Also, I've gone to a 2-spur arrangement here. Fasten is not a full paper mill. There was certainly no room on the layout for anything like that. Instead, it's receiving rolls of paper and various chemicals and producing its own brand of gummed and coated paper stocks. So we have 1 track with both inside and outside loading docks and a 2nd spur where chemicals are received. Now, although there is no road overpass at this end of the layout, putting it in makes it a lot easier to disappear off the end of the layout elegantly. So we put it in. And rather than have a huge long span over all 6 tracks, I've spread the yard slightly so it can be 2 shorter spans, which is probably a lot more likely on the prototype. And it's a little detail that adds a lot of interest for relatively little effort. I've still got a lot of work to do on the back side of the layout. At the moment, the spurs here are simply placeholders. I know I need 3 spurs for the coke works, 2 for the byproducts plant, and 2 more for the cement works. Anyway, at this point, the basic plan was fully approved, although we did talk about the possibility of going to number 7 turnouts on the crossovers instead of number 6. And I drew a variation using those. Here it is. So there's very little in the way of change necessary to be able to get number 7 crossovers. And this was going to be a decision basically whether we wanted to use fast tracks turnouts with code 70 rail or stick with basic code 83 pico. Although we decided for the time being to stick with the number 6 crossovers. And at this point the plan was fully approved for me to just fill in all the details. So let's do that now. Here we show the final version of the plan. The location of spurs in the coke works changed quite considerably, although as I mentioned earlier there are still 3 of them. I knew I needed 3. The rear one is for the coal delivery, the front one is for loading outbound coke, and the one in the middle would just be for the Larry car and probably a tiny 4-wheeled locomotive just to push the same Larry car up and down the track to the quench tower. The only reason this track would even be connected to the rest of the system was so that occasionally the car and locomotive can reach the shops for maintenance. The byproducts plant is somewhat simplified, but there is still room for most of the functions of it. Then, as we said, there's one track leading off the back, the lead to the rest of Diamond Alkali, and there is just about enough room to curve it round through these buildings here, so you can leave a train length cut of cars on that one track. And then facing the other way, we've got Diamond Cement, which again has one track for receiving, one for shipping. And notice how in all cases the loaders and unloaders are approximately in the middle of the tracks that they serve. That is important. And then the incoming cut of cars will be pushed through with the last one in position. And then during the shift, as the cars are unloaded, the industry would gradually move them back out, repositioning them either with a winch or a tractor. And then by the time it's ready to switch the spur again, all the cars would be on the front end of the spur with the last one under the loader. And then the process would begin again. Most of the structures here will be heavily kit bashed from Walther's kits, although the cement works basically fits as intended with just very minor alterations. Uniroyal rubber will be kit bashed from a couple of Walther's tyre plants, or maybe just the carbon hopper from the tyre plant and the rest out of DPM modulars. There are any number of kits that are suitable. Now both Uniroyal and Geico I've shown with fences around the industries, because fenced industries are fairly common on the prototype. It adds a bit of interest, and also the possibility of making the switching job take longer by having working gates. So the operator would then have to unlock the gates, open them, do the switching, and then close the gates again afterwards. On a small layout like this, anything that adds to the switching time is of benefit. Now there is room to put half of a locomotive shed here if he wants to. I've discussed it with him, and more than likely he's going to leave that out altogether, because if we don't put the structure in, we have the option of using the end of the spur to occasionally receive shipments of diesel fuel or spare parts, and the car can just be left there for a few sessions, because the spur is plenty long enough to do that and still park both of the switches on it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is one of a few situations where off-scene staging yards are not necessary. We have this 5-track interchange yard which serves as visible staging. And although this layout includes an end-to-end main line, you won't actually see any through trains during operating, but it's there for completeness, and it gives the customer the option of extending it at one or both ends should he want to in the future. He did mention that he needed that option. And also during operating sessions, it will allow you to run round train length cuts of cars on either of the two loop tracks. Although for short cuts of cars there is this run round here on the yard ladder, clear of the main line. Now, although this layout is fairly simple, operating sessions can be as easy or as complex as you want to make them. You'll basically start with all the incoming cars set up on the 5-track staging yard, and the operator's job will be to exchange the relevant cars for those that are ready to be picked up in the various industries. And it can be as simple as exchanging a handful of cars at a single industry, or as complex as delivering every car in the yard, serving all the industries and picking up the outbounds, or anywhere in between. And of course it can keep 1 or 2 operators busy for as short or as long a time as you want it to. There was talk of the customer having me build all the turnouts for him using Code 70 rail and Fast Track's turnouts, although he eventually decided to go with the Pico option. Instead of installing complex switch machines, he wanted to just reach in and switch them with his fingers, and for that you really need something that has an over-center spring. That is just about all I have to say about this layout. Although it's simple, I found it very interesting to design. As you mentioned earlier, although it's loosely based on the Fairport, Painesville and Eastern, the industries are fairly generic and just a sampling of what this railroad served, as that is what the customer wanted. So I'm just going to leave this plan with you. I'm going to sign off. Hope to see you again next week. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.